I said, well, you know, how did you make it? We understand you've done fairly well. I put my hand up like that. That indicates how you can make it. Work, 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 work. And that's what I've done. Become a big naval base, a deportation base, sending troops and equipment overseas to fight the Japanese. Those ships would be going out, and the families would be waving and crying. But we sold newspapers there. Frank sold in Camp Russo to the CB base. He sold to military guys, construction battalions, they're a branch of the Navy, and I sold for civilians. And we had bicycles. We're the only ones that could buy new bikes because we had what they call when you have an exclusive, nobody else.
You had the newspaper route.
Yeah.
Sure.
So they let us, when we had bikes, real nice bikes with big baskets. And I remember having 3 or 4 bundles of newspapers on those baskets, riding that bike with a little wheel like that in front. You remember those bikes with a big wheel in back? And it used to rain like mad down there. I remember those asphalt parking. I remember that those newspapers tipping off that basket and going all the way down the water that deep. So he built, Arthur Powers built a house. So we had a new house down there. And so we were little. We were by then 10, 11 years old. We helped him build a house, put boards up, nail, and so on. Then he decided we're going to move to Oregon. And we moved to Oregon, and we landed down at Reedsport. He said, okay, I'm going to go up to Florence. I've read about it, or he'd been up there at the lakes, the Syracuse Lake, the biggest lake on the Oregon coast. So he went looking and looked at Florence, and he came back in a day or so. Okay, we bought some ground. We went up there and we drove into Westlake, and we went to the lake. That's Westlake, Syracuse Lake. And he said, okay, here's the property we bought. The huckleberry brush and the rhododendrons were 10 feet tall, and the pine trees were solid, about that big around. Really? So I said, yeah, we're going to clean this. And right behind there, about 150 feet back, was a Syracuse outlet. You could almost walk across the river, the creek, on salmon when they come in. You just solid with them. Anyway, we built that house, and Frank and I went to I think they had 2 rooms in the school there, in the grade school. We went to the 7th and 8th grade, and just almost immediately, in a year or so, they closed it, and we moved we went to school in Florence. They must have taken us up in a bus, I guess. So we finished grade school there, the 8th grade and whatever you have, and then we went to high school there. At Sayusla High School. We were the Vikings of Sayusla High. I was a whistle punk at 16 years old out in the woods.
What is a whistle punk?
A whistle punk, you know, a logging outfit. They have a donkey with a spar pole up on the hill, and they go down the canyon 300 or 400 feet, and then they drag those logs up the mountainside. 2 or 3 or 4 logs, and they used to be logs that big. Today they don't cut those big ones. And I'd sit on a stump halfway up, and they call it the bull, the choker set of the bull. He'd holler, hold it, buzz, one buzz, and it'd stop the equipment because he'd get hung up on a stump, and it'd break the cables if they kept going. They'd have big diesel engines up there hauling those logs. So I was a whistle punk, and I'd run that whistle. I'd sit up there on a stump sleeping because I was drinking beer at night. And they always joked with me, don't you dare fall asleep. And you'd have to then 1 buzz and it stops. 2 buzz and it takes off again. 3 buzz and it backs up after working out in the woods. I worked for the contractor and I was nailing siding, nailing some sheathing on the outside. And I remember I was painting some varnishing, some fancy wood inside. And I was up on a 4 or 5 foot ladder. And somehow I kicked over that gallon of varnish on that finished floor. And the owner was sitting there and the Truett Woodworth was there. Anyway, I got scared and I got off the ladder and there was something said to me. I threw my brush down and walked out. I quit him. I got mad. Later on, he called me when I was out at Mabel's house, Mabel Anderson. Then it was Bernard. And she was married to a different man. And he said, George, this is Truett Woodworth. Yeah, Truett. He said, hey, I'd like to talk to you. So I said, I'm here. So he came out and we sat and talked. He said, George, if you'll go to work for me, I'll make a carpenter out of you in 60 to 90 days. A union carpenter, that's what they were down there. He did exactly that. In 60 to 90 days, I become a union carpenter. So I went to Sears and Roebuck in Eugene because they didn't have the stuff. I bought myself those white coveralls, hammer, hand saw, just those hand tools. And we made a toolbox. Today they got those fancy rag ones, you know, that you buy. Well, you made a toolbox back then. So I got chisels and I got stuff and started working as a carpenter. In 6 months, I was the executive secretary for the local down there. By then I was married and had either Francie, did I have both you girls? I got to go find work, so I headed for the valley. Went to Eugene, there was nothing. It must have been a recession, it was slow. Went to Eugene, nothing. Went up to the Highway 99, there was no such a thing as a Interstate 5. And I went into this town named Albany, there was nothing there. Got back with 99 and went to Salem, nothing. So I had a brother-in-law up in Portland named Zeke Chase. And I'd talk to him every now and then over the telephone. And he said, come on up, I might be able to get you a job, or maybe you go to work for me. He was a concrete finisher. And he got me a job with a company named Timber Structures. They made great big truss, a big commercial truss for big buildings. I said, okay, I'll be back up Monday and go to work. So he jumped in my car. I must have had some kind of, I think Arthur Powers gave me either that old Packard or a 1939 pickup. Jumped in that and started coming down the highway and I started stopping again. I stopped in Salem and come in off of like somewhere around Highway 22 and Morningside, come in there and there was 3 or 4 houses being built down there and that's where they put septic tanks in. In the wintertime you couldn't pump sewer in those. The water table was right up on top. I don't know what they used for toilets.
Right.
But they didn't have sanitary sewers in there. That's where Morrow Crane is in that area in Morningside.
Right.
And where Bob Morrow built that school, the Morningside.
I think.
Morningside.
Is it Morningside?
Yeah. Anyway, down below there, where it was so low, there was water table to come up.
Sure.
So I went to work for those guys there. And they said, okay, we'll hire you. So you be here tomorrow morning. So I went back and I was staying with Charlie Sanborn, my brother's father-in-law. He was working on Interstate 5 driving piling for these bridges and stuff. So in the morning I got up early and come down the 99. It was gravel then because they were starting Interstate 5. And I turned off in Salem again. No, I did not. I went past Salem and wound up in Albany, these big cities, and I was lost.
Because there was so much fog. Now, about what year would that have been? 1951?
1955 or 6.
55 or 6? Uh-huh.
Yeah, that sign in the office is 1956, when I started building for myself. Anyway, I went down there. By then it was 9 o'clock. I got a job, now I've lost it. I come back and it showed up at 10 o'clock in Salem where that construction was going on. They said, where you been? You were supposed to have been here at 8 o'clock or 7:30 or something. I got lost. I told him, okay, see that pile of gravel? Shovel it into that garage. Back then you didn't have all the machinery you got today, so I got in there. He said, you don't shovel gravel like that. He said, give me your shovel. You go like this. You know, you scoop it and throw it.
Right.
Okay, so I did that, and I eventually got framing houses and learned a little bit. Then that kind of run out, and I went to work for a guy by the name of Al Burgess. And the same thing, I started framing, and I learned a lot. That's where I started building houses. I started framing for these contractors. And I met a man by the name of Ralph Maddie. He was a salesman for Omar Caliban, real estate. And I got to know him. He'd come over and talk to me, and he said, George, you're a pretty hard worker. I see you working here at nighttime putting shingles on these houses. And apparently you work for the contractor during the day framing these houses, and then at nighttime you put your car, I remember it was that 41 Packard. I must have had to keep it running or run the battery down. And I'd do maybe a half a wall on that house at nighttime till 11 or something. And he said, you know, what you ought to do is try to build a house, and I'll list it and we'll both make money. Well, I told him, I said, there's no way I could build a house. I don't have any money. And he says, well, okay. He went and talked to Lee Omart. And I believe he was a state senator at that point in time, because he was a state senator, and he was one of the brokers at Omar and Caliban. And he was Lee Omart. So Ralph Maddie come back and said, George, Mr. Omar would like to talk to you. So I went in and sat and talked to him, and he listened to me. He said, okay, I'm going to set up and get an appointment with Mr. Fred Keeler down at First Federal Savings, right next to Pioneer Trust Bank. Okay, so he called me and he said, go on down there and I'll see you there with Mr. Keeler's the president. He'd like to talk to you. So I went down there and sat across his desk, and a man about 75, 80 years old. He was an older gentleman. He was the president of that bank. And I sat there, and he stood up and he said, Mr. Suniga. And here I was, 24, 25 or some crazy thing, 26 or something. He always called me Mr. Suniga. Very nice man. And he said, sit down. I need to talk to you. I understand you want to borrow some money. And I walked out of there with a loan. No. He said, you bring me a financial statement and a plan, and then we'll look at it and then see what you need. And I said, what is a financial statement? Well, it tells me what you've got and, you know, how much you got and whatever. I had borrowed $500 from Mabel Anderson, my mother-in-law, and $500 from my brother, and I bought a house down on Triangle Drive across from those taverns.
Yeah.
The two little shacks there. And I bought it for $5,000 or something, paid $1,000 down, and stayed there for 3 or 4 years with the kids. And anyway, then he said, okay, bring your plans and bring a financial. Then he explained to me, bring whatever you got. I had a runabout boat. I was always, when we lived down in Florence, we did a lot of water skiing. So we were really expert water skiers. And so he said, I had a boat that was worth $600 with an outboard motor on. It wasn't worth. It was a nice little boat. So I took it into him, and eventually he called me, or he asked me to come in. He said, okay, Mr. We're going to give you a loan. How much do you need? I had no idea what to price that house. But I just used my weird imagination. I said, probably 17 or 21 or something to build a 1,200-foot house. It had three bedrooms, a bath and a half, a living room and a dining room and a fireplace in the living room. So nice little houses. Okay, on Stanley Lane, going to Carl Edition, on Stanley Lane, somehow I bought the lot, somehow, probably from the loan. And I framed it in almost single-handedly. The only time we hired people, and we didn't hire them, we'd meet down at the Triangle restaurant in the morning and say, we're going to raise walls at 10 or 11 o'clock today. Okay, we'll be there. And we'd raise those real long walls, 3 or 4 or 5, 6 guys. And then we'd tack them together, and then we'd go on up with the house, because we couldn't raise them by ourselves. So I built that house right on the corner of Stanley Lane and that cross street. I forgot what that was. No, I think it was Madrona and Stanley Lane. And that house is still standing and looks pretty good. And here I was, 25 or 6 or something, and that house looked pretty good. And I built 4 or 5 of them the first year and made nothing but money. We did most of the labor, and my ex-wife and I, we'd go inside and paint sand and paint the houses. I'd put the trim in, and I was actually building the window frames and building the door frames at nighttime, or at my garage on Triangle Drive. I'd build them there and take them, throw them in that Packard or that old 39 pickup, take them, we'd put them in. I'd work hour, and the only time, as I recollect, that KEX would go off the air was at 1 o'clock Sunday night. That's what I recall. At 1 o'clock Sunday night, we'd be in there working, painting, and eventually we'd peter out, at whatever time, and go home. And sometimes I'd work all night. And so those houses get built, because we worked round the clock practically. And my wife and I, Beverly Suniga, we would paint them out, and we both worked on them, and we'd sell them. And we sold 4 that year and made nothing but money. So we just started escalating in the building business. And eventually I bought a 12-lot, a 2 or 3 or 4 acre piece of ground out South Salem by Sunny Slope Acres, and I built a little subdivision. Started doing the same thing, building houses and selling them. And then I started doing little subdivisions. And every now and then they'd have a half-decent shack on it. I remember moving that shack over to one of the lots, and we'd sell that house, make money on it. We wouldn't tear it down. Today you tear them down. And eventually I started making trades for new houses and taking these corners here and there, and I built they were zoned right to build apartments in, a 12 unit, a 10 unit, this and that. So I must have had a half a dozen of those buildings around here and there, those little 12-plexes.
Right.
And so there it started.